Welcome to a deep dive. Our mission today, we're going to take this really interesting piece of writing, dig into it, and sort of pull out the key ideas. Today it's an article from The Economist. And the title, well, it's quite something. When a radical performance artist has command of an army.
Wow. Yeah, that title, it definitely grabs your attention, makes you think, like, performance art and the military, how do those connect? Or what's it really getting at?
That's the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we'll unpack the arguments, the ideas, the implications the article raises. It talks about political conflict here in America, connects it to some recent events, and adds historical context. And a key thing it explores is this tension, in times of unrest. Who looks like they stand for order and who looks like they're maybe causing disorder, especially when, using troops domestically gets involved.
Okay, so it actually talks about performance art, like right at the start.
It does, yeah. That's a link to the title. It goes way back to the 1960s. Talks about this group, the Yippies. Maybe you've heard of them.
The Yippies? Vaguely. What was their thing?
Well, they had this big idea. They thought the whole system, government, society was just, well, the article uses the word rotten.
Rotten, like really bad, broken.
Yeah, fundamentally flawed, maybe corrupt. And their strategy to show everyone how rotten it was, they wanted to create spectacle, mostly for TV.
Spectacle. Okay. Is that like a big show, something very visual?
Exactly. Spot on. Think of actions designed purely to get attention, to be this huge visible thing everyone sees, especially on the news.
Yeah.
Like they scattered dollar bills on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Wow, just threw money? That's wild.
Creates an image, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Another time, they're trying to get, levitate the Pentagon.
Levitate! Like, make the building float. Seriously.
Well, they didn't actually make it float, of course. It was the attempt, the performance. Their theory, the article says, was basically, if we do crazy stuff and provoke the police or army to attack us, then people watching on TV will see that forceful reaction and realize, oh, we live in a fascist state. The performance was meant to expose the system's true nature. Does that make sense? Using spectacle to provoke a reaction.
Okay. I think I get it. Do something extreme, make the government react strongly, and hope people see that reaction as bad. Did it work? Did people think, oh, no, fascism?
Well, according to the article, no, it pretty much backfired.
Backfired. Okay. So it had the opposite effect. Didn't work out.
Exactly. The opposite. The article says the silent majority, regular folks not involved in protests, they saw these stunts, and they ended up voting for Richard Nixon.
Right. So the political result was the opposite of what the Yippies wanted.
Precisely. And the article draws a key conclusion here. The Yippies got on the wrong side of a fundamental political divide. Who stands for order? Many people saw their actions not as revealing a problem, but as just creating chaos.
Okay. That's really interesting, this history lesson. Using showy actions, performance, that didn't land the way they hoped because people saw it as disorder. So how does the article link that to now?
Okay, here's the main connection the article makes. It jumps to today, specifically mentioning Donald Trump. The article argues he's also using a kind of performance and spectacle. But in his case, it says he's trying to show that he does stand for order. And the example given is sending troops into Los Angeles.
Okay, so sending troops. The article is saying that's like a performance, a show. Is that the idea?
Yes, that's a core argument, that the main driver for sending troops to L.A., in this specific instance, wasn't necessarily about a practical need to enforce order right then and there, but more about the performance and the spectacle.
Okay, so enforce order just means like stopping violence, making things calm.
Yeah, basically using authority, like police or troops, to maintain peace and stop illegal activity. And performance and spectacle here, does that mean it's more about how it looks, the image it creates for people watching?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Actions designed to be highly visible, to create a powerful impression, maybe more for the political message than the actual boots-on-the-ground effect. The article highlights a key detail, the rules these troops had. They were limited to federal property only. They explicitly couldn't do crowd control or immigration enforcement out in the city.
Oh.
Okay, so the rules meant they couldn't actually, do much about protests or people on the streets. So their presence was the main point, the visual.
That seems to be the article's interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
Using that detail to argue it was more about the visual symbolism, the performance of being tough on disorder, than a direct intervention in the city itself.
Okay, I'm following. So the Yippies used spectacle to show the system was rotten, and the article says Trump uses spectacle, like sending troops, to show he represents order.
That's the parallel, exactly. And the article argues this sets up what it calls a formula for conflict.
A formula for conflict. Like a recipe for creating conflict.
Sort of, yeah. The article describes it as targeting America's big cities. It points out these cities often have large numbers of undocumented migrants and are, crucially, almost always run by Democrats.
Okay, so aiming at particular places with certain features.
Right. And the article presents this as a deliberate strategy. It says the bet is that the cycle of protest, violence, and repression benefits him and makes his opponents look extreme.
Betting. Like, he thinks the cycle helps him politically?
That's the argument, that if there are protests, maybe some violence happens, and then the government uses forced repression to stop it. This whole sequence helps him, makes him look strong, decisive, and makes his opponents, the Democrats running the cities, look weak or extreme.
Okay, repression. That's like stopping protests or activities using force.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Using power, often force, to control or stop people's actions. So the article sees it as a political calculation. And it notes this is different from typical political fights because it involves actual troops, which raises the stakes. It could escalate and spread.
Escalate. Get bigger, more serious, spread to other cities.
Precisely. Become more intense, potentially more violent, or move beyond just L.A. The article then lays out how differently people in America view this whole situation. It describes two sides.
Okay, the two different views. What's the first one?
Well, one side, the article says, is cheering him on. For them, places like L.A. are seen as having internal enemies, even invaders waving foreign flags. They believe Democratic leaders harbor these groups.
Harbor, like shelter or protect them.
Yes, essentially protect or allow them to stay, rather than removing them. This side feels this prevents the government from keeping other Americans safe. They see it as disrespecting the president, his supporters, the police, the soldiers. And often, the article notes, they want similar troop deployments in Chicago or New York.
Okay. Wow, that's a strong view. Seeing cities as full of enemies. What about the other side the article mentions?
The other side, it says, is deeply offended. They feel it goes against fundamental values. Their argument is that troops are being used to suppress civil rights and specifically target brown people.
Target, like focus on them negatively because of their background.
Yes, directing military or police action towards specific ethnic or racial groups. This side, the article notes, compares it unfavorably to the 1960s when troops were sometimes sent to protect civil rights marchers. They view the political figure involved as a hypocrite.
Hypocrite. Someone who says one thing but does another. Does the article give an example?
Yes, it mentions the January 6th Capitol riot by his supporters. This side sees a contradiction there. They also worry he prefers one-man rule over the separation of powers and that troops on streets might become normalized, pointing to a planned military parade.
Wow. Okay, so really, really different interpretations. One sees order against enemies, the other sees suppressed rights and hypocrisy. I get the two views. But it sounds so tense. What does the article say about the dangers?
It absolutely flags the danger. It says the situation is alarmingly reminiscent of the 1960s.
Alarmingly reminiscent. Like worrying because it's so similar to that dangerous past.
Exactly, a worrying echo. It notes the last time a president sent the National Guard against a governor's wishes was back then. But, and this is important, the article also points out key differences between now and the 60s, differences that might offer, well, a bit more hope.
Oh, differences. So it's not exactly the same, maybe less dangerous in some ways. What are the differences?
Okay, yeah, let's look at those. First, the scale of violence, at least when the article came out. It contrasts the 1965 Watts riots in L.A., very bad, 34 killed, thousands arrested, with the recent L.A. protests.
Right. How are the recent ones different?
Well, there's some violence, cars burned, things thrown. But the article says the police generally managed the protests well-marshaled. Crucially, nobody had been killed. And the L.A. mayor, Karen Bass, acted decisively with a curfew, showing she was on the side of order too. Arrests were in the hundreds, not thousands.
Okay, so less violence, more control this time. That's a relief. What else?
Second difference. The soldiers and civil-military relations, how the Army relates to the public. The 60s had Vietnam and the awful Kent State shootings, where guardsmen killed students. That really damaged trust.
Yes, Kent State. Very sad.
Very. The article contrasts that with 2025. It argues civil-military relations are different now, and crucially, most soldiers do not want to be on the streets facing down other Americans.
So the soldiers themselves maybe feel differently about this kind of duty now.
That's the suggestion. It mentions soldiers policing NY subways recently at the governor's request, and notes that wasn't widely seen as a harbinger of fascism.
Harbinger. Okay, new word. A harbinger is like
Right.
harmon, a sign that something bad is coming.
Yes, perfect. A harbinger is a sign or omen. often of something bad. So troops in the subway weren't seen as this scary sign of dictatorship. People maybe viewed domestic military presence differently now than after Kent's state. Makes sense. Harbinger.
Yes, harbinger. Got it. So soldiers feel different. Public reaction might be different. Okay, what was the third difference?
The third point loops back to the purpose in L.A. Again, the article emphasizes that given L.A.'s image as a city of spectacle and performance itself, the troop deployment seemed mostly about performance for political gain.
Right, this show again.
Yeah. Looking tough, saying, send in the Marines, hey, dominating the news, getting a reaction. The article points to the visual. Soldiers, Mexican flags, flames, smoke. How that image plays politically.
Okay, let me try to summarize the differences. So compared to the 60s, less violence so far, soldiers may be less willing to confront civilians, and the LA deployment seems more about political performance than actual need.
That's a great recap of the differences the article lays out.
But
it's a big but. The article warns this situation is still perilous.
Perilous. Very dangerous.
Risky. Exactly. Perilous means full of danger or risk. It calls the actions reckless and possibly designed to provoke. It mentions a rally at Fort Bragg stirring up political fervor among troops. The risk remains, it says, that things could still descend into further disorder or lethal violence in L.A. or elsewhere.
Descend into,
Fine.
What, fall into chaos or killing?
Yes, degenerate into that. So the danger is still very real.
Okay. Wow. So it's still dangerous? Did the article mention anyone trying to, I don't know, counteract this? Calm things down?
It did mention two significant responses. One was California's Governor Newsom. He gave a speech calling the troop deployment theatrics over public safety.
Theatrics, like just for show, like theater, not real.
Precisely. Theatrics refers to behavior that's overly dramatic or designed for effect, like a play, rather than being practical or sincere. Newsom supported peaceful protest but was firm. Criminal behavior will not be tolerated, full stop.
Okay, so drawing a line. Peaceful protest, okay. Crime, not okay. What was the other response?
The other came from some protesters. Instead of anger or confrontation towards the troops, the article highlights that some laid flowers before National Guard troops.
Oh, flowers. For the soldiers, that's a very different image. Very peaceful.
It is. And the article kind of ends on that note. It expresses a hope that maybe actions like laying flowers are conjuring a vision of the country which both Americas can still believe in.
Conjuring a vision. Like creating an image or idea of a possible future.
Yeah, conjuring a vision means creating a picture or idea in people's minds, almost like magic. Here, it's the idea of a country where maybe these deep divides could be bridged.
Yeah.
Slightly hopeful flicker at the end.
Okay, so this deep dive. We looked at the Economist article, the idea of political performance, the yippies, the connection to troops in LA, the formula for conflict. There's two really different views. The 60s comparison with the key differences, the dangers, and then those hopeful signs like the flowers.
That sums it up really well. It definitely gives you a lot to think about, doesn't it? The difference between the look of an action and its real purpose or effect.
Yeah, exactly. It makes me wonder, how do you tell? When powerful actions are for real safety versus just for show, for politics. And how do these totally different ideas about what order even is cause so much trouble between people?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? How do we see clearly what's really going on? And can these clashing views of order ever find common ground? Something for all of us maybe to keep thinking about.
Thank you for walking through that article. It was a lot to take in.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Definitely keep mulling over those questions.